Hey everybody, it's really cold outside here in New York. It's like 0 degrees out right now. It might be lower than that. I haven't been outside for a little while. But I figured I'd take a moment real quick to answer a quick question that we got on Tumblr on Writers. Question is from Tintinret. It says, I finished a complete draft of my manuscript, but it isn't long enough to be a novel yet. Any tips on how to lengthen my story? Well, let's talk first about the idea of a complete story. So if you have a narrative, you've got a beginning and a middle and an end, maybe not in that order, but there should be a completeness to that idea, even if it's part of a series. So for example, when you read the Harry Potter novels, there's 7 of them, but each of those novels can be read on its own without having to go back and be like, oh man, I haven't read enough about this to know what's happening in book 4. I'm going to have to go back and look for what I need. There's things that are in there that you don't know, that you may not know because you didn't read these books, but at the same time, you don't have to have that knowledge. There's a lot of great series that do, that make sure that you have a complete story. Susan Cooper's The Dark is Rising series is a great series that you should check out if you haven't read it before. But anyway, so first off, you want to make sure that your idea is complete, that you have all the elements inside the story to not only make it, have a beginning, middle, and end, but also so that it conveys everything that you need it to say. So as a thought with that, there's something that's been going around for a while called a 6-word story, and it's really just taking an idea and boiling it down to the essence of what it is. And I'm gonna grab a couple of those real quick, just a second. Okay, so I've got a couple of examples of some really concise and powerful 6-word stories. And again, they give the complete sense of what you need to know to feel that you've read something of a story. The first one says, miles between us don't erase memories. So that's an idea, and it brings everything together, and it shows that there's a past that this is looking at, and that there's a present that's happening right now. We don't know where the future of that story is going, but it's there. And then we also have, he picked the prettiest flowers first, right? And that gives us a sense of a character, as well as some explanation of who the character is, and an idea that whoever is writing this has a history with that person, and there's something significant that's in there. Okay, so the first thing that you need to consider is, do you have a completeness to your narrative? And that's important. Now, of course, it's hard to put together 6 words just to make your complete story. And that's not what we're here to talk about. What we're here to talk about is to add to your word count. So let's talk a little bit first about some more details in there. So you've got your 6-word story, and that's just like crunching down everything in that concept and that idea into just a tiny little nugget. And then you can move up to the idea of flash fiction. And with a flash fiction, you've got just a certain number of words, again, to present a complete idea. And that's really what we're looking for with a story, I think. Most people, when they read a story, they don't want to just get to the middle of the story and be done. What happens if you read a book and you get to the middle and it just kind of stops? The guy's going to shoot an arrow and try and save the day, but who knows? You got to figure it out for yourself. You got to decide for yourself how it ends. Nobody wants that. Well, a few people might. Anyway, though, what we are looking for is that completeness. So, if you've got your story and it's complete already, then we need to move on to this next part. But if you look over your story and you say, well, I could probably add some things in here to add to this completeness, then that's great. Go back and do that first, and then we can talk about some of these other things. All right? So, if you've done all of that and you're ready to go with some other ways to add to your word count, then we can go forward. All right? So, how big is a novel? Depends on who you talk to. At least 50,000 words. probably closer to 70 to 100,000 words, depending on what area you're writing in and who you're submitting to. Regardless, how do you get more words into your word count? The first thing to do is to go back to the beginning of your story and look for little spaces where you can add in details, right? This is important too, because in the first time you're writing through a story, when you're trying to make a complete draft, it's easy to be in a rush, especially if you're doing National Novel Writing Month. I found that it's so much easier to just get the words down and not worry about what I'm writing and just go, 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 without actually writing everything that I need to do for that story. So go back, start with chapter 1, read through that first paragraph and say, oh, maybe I could add a little bit more description. Maybe I could talk a little bit more about this element of this part. And as you're reading through the book, you're going to find that you're going to add, maybe 5 or 10 words per paragraph. And if you've got a lot of paragraphs, that's a lot of words that you're adding to the content. And you're not even really trying to add stuff. You're just saying, this is what I need. This is what this section needs. Okay, here's another section. It needs just a little bit more substance to make it complete and make it full. Now what you're going to find out though is that as you're adding content, you may come to spots where you're like, why is this paragraph in my book? What am I doing with this paragraph? I'm just going to get rid of it. So you're going to have a balancing act with that. And probably you'll come out ahead a little bit, but maybe not as much as you want. So after, not padding, that's not the word I want. It's the words in my head, but not padding. But after filling those empty spaces, those missing spaces, and contracting some spaces that don't need to be there, you can start looking at, is there a scene that this story needs? Or is there a way that I can, increase the understanding of my readers as I'm working on this story? Is there a way to do that? Hold on. I scratch my nose. Much better. Okay. Anyway, though, so what you want to look at is how can I add some quality content to my story without just padding it, right? So maybe there's a situation where something's happening, but you haven't actually talked about it. It's been in the background. Two characters are over here talking, and the third character is over here doing another thing. If you can, maybe you want to go over and show that missing piece that you haven't talked about because you didn't feel you needed to. But you could. There's no reason that you can't go in there and talk about that. Hold on. So what you can look at with that as an idea is, let's say that your character, you have two characters, Bob and Betty, and they're over here and they're working on whatever it is they're doing. They're painting a fence, right? And this is a time where they're making a connection, and you're showing how they're connecting over this time of painting the fence. And who knows? Maybe it was maybe Joe over here is the one that got Bob and Betty over here to paint the fence for him. He's Tom Sawyer, right? You remember that scene where he convinces people to paint the fence for him, right? So instead of just focusing on Bob and Betty and that development, maybe you spend some time saying, what did Joe do after he convinced these two to go paint the fence? Right? So you do this scene, and then you have another scene where you actually show what he does with that time that he's got. And that may add to your story. It may not. I don't know. It's something that you need to look into. So you can come up with, not filler, but you can add to the substance of your story with small content pieces and descriptions and all those kinds of things into the word count. Those are important. And then you can look at other scenes that you haven't had in there. Imagine it's like you're looking at a DVD of a movie and there's the cut scenes, right? Maybe you need to put one of those cut scenes back in the story. What are your characters doing while other characters are doing other things? And those are important details that can enhance your story and can add to the substance of it. So consider those ideas, see what they do for you. If you've got other questions, you can definitely let us know. We'll put up the thing up here. I will also, once I track down where it's at, I will put up for the Patreon. Please consider following us with that. This is on YouTube, of course. If you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe. This is probably the only time I've ever mentioned that because I always forget. But it would be great for that if you're interested in seeing more of what we're doing with us. All right, have a good one. Thank you.